Hey guys, welcome to our second lesson in the Screwtape Letters. Now before we begin, there's a few things I want to draw your attention to. The first thing is, if you have not gotten a copy of the Screwtape Letters yet, use the link in the description down below and get yourself a PDF copy. You'll really want to read along with this. Secondly, if you missed the first lesson, I highly recommend you go back and watch the first lesson because that will make things make a lot more sense. Thirdly, if you've done the reading on your own and you don't want to listen to me talk at the beginning, then I'll put a timestamp in the description down below and you can just click on that and go to the lesson part. Lastly, today's lesson is on the third letter of the Screwtape Letters, so I highly recommend you go back and read the second letter on your own. Got it? Okay, let's see what Screwtape has for us today.
My dear Wormwood, I am very pleased by what you tell me about this man's relations with his mother, but you must press your advantage. The enemy will be working from the center outwards, gradually bringing more and more of the patient's conduct under the new standard, and may reach his behavior to the old lady at any moment. You want to get in first. Keep in close touch with our colleague, Glubos, who is in charge of the mother, and build up between you and that house a good settled habit of mutual annoyance, daily pinpricks. The following methods are useful. 1. Keep his mind on the inner life. He thinks his conversion is something inside him, and his attention is therefore chiefly turned at present to the states of his own mind, or rather to that very expurgated version of them, which is all you should allow him to see. Encourage this. Keep his mind off the most elementary duties by directing it to the most advanced and spiritual ones. Aggravate that most useful human characteristic, the horror and neglect of the obvious. You must bring him to a condition in which he can practice self-examination for an hour without discovering any of those facts about himself, which are perfectly clear to anyone who has ever lived in the same house with him or worked in the same office. 2. It is no doubt impossible to prevent his praying for his mother, but we have means of rendering the prayers innocuous. Make sure that they are always very spiritual, that he is always concerned with the state of her soul and never with her rheumatism. 2 advantages follow. In the first place, his attention will be kept on what he regards as her sins, by which, with a little guidance from you, he can be induced to mean any of her actions which are inconvenient or irritating to himself. Thus you can keep rubbing the wounds of the day a little sorer, even when he is on his knees. The operation is not at all difficult, and you will find it very entertaining. In the second place, since his ideas about her soul will be very crude and often erroneous, he will, in some degree, be praying for an imaginary person, and it will be your task to make that imaginary person daily less and less like the real mother, the sharp-tongued old lady at the breakfast table. In time, you may get the cleavage so wide that no thought or feeling from his prayers for the imagined mother will ever flow over into his treatment of the real one. I have had patients of my own so well in hand that they could be turned at a moment's notice from impassioned prayer for a wife's or son's soul to beating or insulting the real wife or son without a qualm. 3. When 2 humans have lived together for many years, it usually happens that each has tones of voice and expressions of face which are almost unendurably irritating to the other. Work on that. Bring fully into the consciousness of your patient that particular lift of his mother's eyebrows, which he has learned to dislike in the nursery, and let him think how much he dislikes it. Let him assume that she knows how annoying it is, and does it to annoy. If you know your job, he will not notice the immense improbability of the assumption. And of course, never let him suspect that he has tones and looks which similarly annoy her. As he cannot see or hear himself, this is easily managed. 4. In civilized life, domestic hatred usually expresses itself by saying things which would appear quite harmless on paper. The words are not offensive, but in such a voice, or at such a moment, that they are not far short of a blow to the face. To keep this game up, you and Glubos must see to it that each of these two fools has a sort of double standard. Your patient must demand that all his own utterances are to be taken at their face value and judged simply on the actual words, while at the same time judging all his mother's utterances with the fullest and most oversensitive interpretation of the tone and the context and the suspected intention. She must be encouraged to do the same to him. Hence, from every quarrel they can both go away convinced, or very nearly convinced, that they are quite innocent. You know the kind of thing. I simply ask her what time dinner will be, and she flies into a temper. Once this habit is well established, you have the delightful situation of a human saying things with the express purpose of offending, and yet having a grievance when often offense is taken. Finally, tell me something about the old lady's religious position. Is she at all jealous of the new factor in her son's life? At all piqued that he should have learned from others, and so late, what she considers she gave him such good opportunity of learning in childhood? Does she feel he is making a great deal of fuss about it, or that he is getting in on very easy terms? Remember the elder brother in the enemy's story. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
So, Screwtape is excited that the patient has a mother that doesn't get along with him very well. And from here we actually get to see some of the more conniving tactics that Screwtape uses in order to get humans away from God. But remember one thing. The purpose of this book is to not understand how demons operate or how the devil operates, but to learn more about ourselves. You see, a lot of Christians will go through life thinking that every time they do something bad, that, oh, the devil made me do that. And while they might not actually say that, that's kind of what they're thinking. But the truth is that that's not how it works. In fact, you could make the argument that Screwtape doesn't actually do anything at all. He just emphasizes feelings and actions that are already inside the patient. He doesn't create thoughts, he emphasizes them. He doesn't make the patient do anything, he just encourages him to do it. So, as we continue through this story, don't say to yourself, that's how the devil does it. No, ask yourself, wow, have I ever been that way? Now, Screwtape gives Wormwood 4 pieces of advice in order to draw the patient away from God. The first thing he tells him to do is to get him to focus on the inner life. What he's telling him here is to have the patient focus so much on his inner spiritual nature that he never ever considers the basic outward characteristics. You've seen people like this. This is the person who will post all kinds of scriptures and godly sounding sayings online, but when you meet them in person, they're extremely rude and inconsiderate to everyone around them. Many Christians make the mistake of only focusing on their heart, as we like to call it, and then just assume that their external actions will come naturally. Now, there is some truth to this, because in Matthew 12:34 it says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. But we're not supposed to just focus on one or the other. It's not just your inner life or just your external life, it's both at the same time. You see, both extremes can be bad. If you focus just on your external life, you're going to turn into one of those people that is a fake Christian, because everything you say might sound right, but in your heart, it doesn't mean anything. You've met people like this. These are the people who always say all the right things, and it just sounds so nice and so sweet, but it never actually reaches their eyes. Hey, is this where the church service is at? Hello there, son. or if you come to the house of the Lord today to worship his name and praise his greatness. Right. Well, do I need like a Bible or something? We believe that God's word is in all of our hearts, and we should seek it out in everything that we do. Okay, are you feeling all right? The Lord has blessed me today with feelings of joy and gratefulness that you're coming to us to join us to worship in the Lord's house today. That sounds great. I mean, I really just want to kind of, maybe sit down and listen if that's cool. God does not call us to sit. He calls us to stand for his name and do what is right. Okay, maybe I should just go. If you go in the name of the Lord and worship him in every step that you take. May God bless you on your journey, son. Ugh. See the point? You have to work on both the internal and external. It can't be one or the other. James has a great way of describing this. In James 2:18 it says, "But someone might say, 'You have faith, but I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works.'" A practical way to look at this is in our prayers. We tend to be vague in our prayers, but to combat against the desire to only focus on the inner nature, we need to get specific. It looks kind of like this. If you were to usually say, "God, make me more humble," instead say, "God, make me more humble when my sister is really bugging me, because I know I can be bugging towards her too." See how that works? All right, let's move on. Screwtape's next bit of advice is to have the patient focus his prayers only on the mother's spiritual needs and not her physical needs. He says this will have two benefits. The first is that it will keep the patient focused on the mother's sins, and that it will also help the patient to only ever pray for his impression of his mother and not actually his mother herself. This is a habit that a lot of Christians have. What Screwtape is describing here is when a person prays for somebody while they're getting more and more angry at their impression of the person instead of the actual person. Dear God, please help Steve to know how much he hurt me. I was standing right behind him when he was talking bad about me. God, help him to know that he has sinned against you, Father. Help him to know that what he has done has hurt me deeply, Father. Help him to know that it doesn't matter how many times he prays for youth group or he gets up in front and leads singing, that he has sinned against me, he has sinned against you, and he has sinned against man. See, what's happening here is we try to use prayer as a way to only make ourselves feel better. While that is a side effect of prayer, that shouldn't be the main goal. The main goal of prayer should be for us to draw closer to God and to pray for other people to draw closer to God. Here's how that should actually look. Dear God, today Steve talked badly about me behind my back. God, I pray that you would help me to remember how this feels the next time I'm wanting to talk badly behind other people's backs. Help me to forgive him, Father. Help him to know that this wasn't right. But also, God, if there's something in his life that's drawing him away from you, that will go away and he would be able to draw closer to you again. See how that works? Okay, let's move on. I'm going to combine Screwtape's third and fourth pieces of advice because they're very similar, and it's basically this. Get the patient to focus solely on all his mother's faults and never on his own. Now, we've all done this. I don't know a single human being who hasn't, and we've seen it all the time. It's just like when you get mad at somebody for doing something to you, but then you turn right around and do that same thing to somebody else. It's like when you see somebody go online and they'll put some like really sad or mad statement online, and they'll be just vague enough so that you don't actually know exactly who the person they're talking about is, but you really do know who they're talking about. But they would be just as angry if somebody were to do that to them. What needs to change here is we need to have more charity for one another. Now, I don't mean charity as in giving something to someone who's poor. I want to use the old definition of charity, the one that the Bible uses, and that is having grace and tolerance in judging others. See, what happens is a lot of times we always assume that if somebody has offended us, they meant it. They meant to do that. They did it on purpose. But that's usually not the case. When I was still single, a friend of mine sent me a list of guys' rules for girls in dating. And it was just a big joke, and it had a lot of statements about the stereotypes, how girls act in dating. But my favorite one was number 4, where it said, if a guy says something to you that can be taken as offensive or non-offensive, he always meant the non-offensive one. Do you see how that works? We should be showing charity towards people when they do something that might offend us. We need to show grace in the way that we treat and judge people because we want people to show grace when they judge us. Guys, this is the end of our lesson. Thank you so much for joining me again. I hope that you continue to read the Screwtape Letters, and I hope that you will let me know what you think about it. Give me a shout out in the comments. Let me know how I'm doing, and if you have any suggestions for things that I can do better. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you all next week.